You've been here, you've been talking to people. This mood of optimism, where do you see it?
Well, I see this is a very interesting conference. As you were saying, the mantra of this conference is transactions, transactions, transactions. So it's not, people aren't here to talk. There's actually, I don't know if your other guests have discussed it, but the African Development Bank has actually set out an app with a list of dozens of different projects that you can look into and then have one-on-one or bilateral discussions with the project managers over the course of 3 days, and which will hopefully lead to quite a few transactions coming out of this conference. So it's very unique in that way and transactional.
And that's one thing the organizers said, that it was going to be small on talk, big on deals. How do you see that shaping up?
Well, it's quite interesting. They have a room right next to the large conference room where they have little tables and sitting areas where you can actually see people already sitting down and discussing specific deals. So I'm quite hopeful that some transactions will come out of this.
Now, we're talking about not only foreign direct investment, but also investment amongst African countries as well. One of the things that I asked Akinwumi Adesina yesterday on this very channel was what kind of political will is there across Africa to make these things happen?
Well, look, there are several countries, top of mind are South Africa and Morocco, that have very well-established financial institutions and capital markets that are looking for opportunities to invest. And one of the things that we've been quite involved in is actually bringing South African institutional investors across the continent, specifically in Egypt in recent years. We actually hold our annual Egyptian conference here in Cape Town to attract the South African investors. And it's something that we do across the continent. We do the same thing with Nigeria. And we hope to develop more relations like that across the continent. So we do see the political will, and we do see investor appetite for it.
Where do you think the continent needs to work harder in making it easier to do business?
Well, I think one of the big issues that the continent has started to address is interregional trade. It's easier to travel from Lagos back to London and fly down to Accra or Abidjan than it is to take a direct flight. It's easier to send up raw materials up to Europe to be processed and then to send them back as imports from Europe rather than to trade them within the continent. This is a big issue. It's a massive market. There's great opportunities. And as a way to develop, it's very important that the trade barriers are reduced.
And do you think there is the political will on the continent for that? I mean, there's been talk for some time about having a visa-free access for business on this continent. It's still a distance away.
I think there is the will. It's quite complicated, and there are many technical issues such as security that need to be addressed. So I see the will, but yes, it will take some time. But what's important is that steps are taken in that direction.
What about the currency issue in all of this?
Well, currency is a big issue. Whenever you invest into a new country, which doesn't use your home currency, you always have to look at all the typical factors that you always look at in investment. But you also need to look at, is the currency currently overvalued or undervalued? And that can make a very big difference on your investment results over your 5 or 7 year period. The other issue is the ease of exporting your profits once you do receive them. There are a few countries on the continent where, due to booming consumer markets, companies have made fantastic returns but have great difficulty in taking their returns outside of the country. So that's also a big concern.
And what do you think could bring about change in those areas?
Well, I think there needs to be, at the government level, a real will to regionalize. I was recently in West Africa and looking at the different Francophone and Anglophone countries in West Africa. All of them on a standalone basis are attractive but quite small. And any effort to regionalize, as they've done already with the stock market, as a few have done on the currency, do provide dividends in terms of increasing investor interest in the economies.
So looking forward now, you've obviously done your homework on this. I mean, what would be a good result, shall we say, for this conference in terms of US dollar direct investment?
Well, I think the AFDB has set a very high standard in that they've identified specific projects, and each of them with different dollar amounts. So I think a key will not necessarily be 1 or 2 big billion-dollar projects that make it look like it's quite successful. What will be quite interesting is to see how many of the more difficult to finance $1 million projects, $3 million projects, $10 million projects are actually done. And that will be easy to check for anyone who attends. As I said, we have the app We have all the projects listed, and we can monitor over the next coming weeks and months which of those have actually been implemented.
Just lastly, I mean, what other, you mentioned the currency there, you mentioned regulation and repatriation of profits. What other great hurdle is there to doing business in Africa?
Well, what's, one of the criteria that investors look at when they look at investing in emerging markets is what the ease of doing business index. And a lot of countries have made that at the very top of their list of priorities, Rwanda probably being number one in affecting that change in the last few years, have basically looked at the criteria. How easy is it to open up a business? How easy is it to open up a bank account? How quickly can you repatriate your profits? How easy is it to hire employees and to fire employees? All of those criteria are very important for investors and are a guideline that governments can look at and test to see how are they improving over time on each of the criteria.
And just lastly, very quickly, looking around the continent, obviously most countries will be keen to get investors. Which countries do you think might be doing the investing out of this conference?
Well, I would group countries that are attractive for investments into 4 buckets. One of them is the ones, as I mentioned, that have done the ease of doing business homework. The Rwandas, the ones that are doing the governance, so Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco. Then you have the countries whose demographics are so overwhelmingly interesting you can't avoid them. This is the Nigerias, the Ethiopias, the Egypts. You'll have countries that have fantastic natural resources. That's going to be, the DRC and Guinea-Conakry. And then you have countries that have had recent political change that people are very excited about. This would be Angola, South Africa, Zimbabwe. So all 4 of those different buckets hopefully will see attractive projects being invested coming out of this conference.
Christophe Charlier of Renaissance Capital, thank you very much.